Warning, this podcast may contain content that some may find triggering. Also, this podcast is in no way trying to glorify the life or lifestyle of the subject, but rather document it for educational, historical, and artistic purposes. How the ones she married weren't always the ones she loved, and the ones she loved were too dangerous to marry.
I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come on. I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come on. I'm gonna turn back my mattress and let you all my springs. I want you to find me, daddy, till the bell do ring. Oh, daddy, I want you to shade and dry.
Hello, my name is Summer, and this is Paying For It. Welcome to episode 4 and part 2 of Norma Wallace. The next 10 years she describes as the most glamorous time of her life, and I will let you know a little secret, it was. I honestly cannot wait to get into it, but before I jump in, I wanted to chit chat a little bit about a couple upcoming changes. Originally, my plan was to have my audio episodes on all podcast platforms and my video version on YouTube. I put a lot of work into editing these video versions, but with the taboo subject I have chosen to be so fascinated with and share with y'all, I think it's important I'm able to be fully authentic with what I say, how I say it, and what I put into my videos. I like to tell the history, but also show the history in the video versions. Some of those pictures may be a little too risky to just put out on the internet for anyone to stumble upon. And I want to just get ahead of how, we all know how YouTube is. They're very, very strict, I would say. But yeah, so I basically just want to make sure I'm kind of ahead of the game on being authentic with what I want to say, how I want to say it, and what I put in my video versions. But yeah, I just want to be fully authentic with how I say and what I put in the videos. This kind of came along because in this episode, specifically, we will be talking about a famous photographer back in Storyville. We were briefly mentioned this photographer, so it's not even like he's a huge part of the story, but so I'm hosting my podcast on Anchor and noticed that they have a way to offer subscriptions. So I'm just thinking that is the way I'm going to go, is video version behind a paywall, a subscription, because I want to be able to add anything I want and I want to be able to say anything I want. So in the future, it might come down to audio versions being, if need be, censored on YouTube, but hopefully not here on Spotify or any of the platforms. But the photographer I was mentioning was this photographer was super famous he became super famous for his nude photographs of the Storyville woman, and I want to include some of those. They're beautiful, and I want to include some of those in the video version, but I can't just have anyone stumbling upon them, and I'm sure YouTube would immediately take it down as it is nude. So also, we are talking about the entertainment district. We are talking about girls. We're talking about a salacious topic that involves the vice district of our history. Where there was prostitution, there was vice, as it is included in vice. And with vice comes a little bit of alcohol. And as I am a bartender and I'm known to make a good cocktail here and there, I also want to be able to have a drink with y'all. And I am of age. Please Trust me, I am of age. So yeah, I want to be able to grab my cocktail if I want one and just sit down and enjoy with you guys. So here's the deal. I know I'm new. I have probably 0 followers and 0 listeners other than my mother. Hello, Mom. But yeah, we're just going to start it that way. And I think in the future, I will thank myself. And if I sit with 0 subscribers and no one gets to see those awesome videos, then okay, oh well. It is what it is. I wanted to include that art, and it's my passion, it's my art, and I have to do it authentically. So yeah, starting with this episode, the video version is going to be behind a paywall, not because I'm like looking to get paid or whatever, but I want to be authentic, and I hope you all understand that. And yeah, it's, if you liked my video, the 3 that are up, the video versions that are already up, I'm going to leave up for all to enjoy, because there wasn't anything too naughty in those. But moving forward, I want to be able to include whatever I can find, including nudes, historical nudes. Oh, my mic just went out. And so also I'm gonna Spotify Anchor offers like a subscription base, which I will utilize, but I think I'm also going to start cheekily, I feel like it should be OnlyFans, right? Like, I feel like even though, you know, I want to, like, it's funny, it's cheeky, but I think Patreon offers subscription based things, so I'm almost thinking about that. I haven't quite decided which one I want to go. I think I'm going to go Patreon because I am a bartender, like I was just saying, so I was thinking like I could have a tier for the audio versions, and then if y'all want to see what I'm drinking and how I make it, I could also add that as a tier. We'll see. I'm not sure how I want to go. But as of right now, I know for sure that I'm going to offer the subscription base on Anchor, and soon to have some kind of other subscription base. So yeah, so that we can have a little drink together. We can, you know, be cheeky. Anywho, that is that. Also, I've created a TikTok and I've created a Twitter. If you'd like to follow me there, Paying For It podcast on both TikTok and Twitter. So yeah, let's just start getting into it. Let's grab our coffee, mocktail, or cocktail, and jump into Norma Wallace part 2. I'm telling you, this part, it is so good. So good. Her life. Norma Wallace's life. Oh, I just finished last night listening to Norma Wallace, the last Madam of New Orleans. And, well, her story starts crazy and ends crazy. But this part 2 is probably, like she says, the most glamorous and most fascinating. So yeah, I can't wait to share it with you, and cheers. Also, a little tidbit of me. I love a spicy cocktail. And I'm gonna put this recipe up on Patreon or OnlyFans, depending on which one I go for. So, she's organized. Anyways, so yeah, this is a spicy tequila, I guess you could call it mule, or just like not even a mule. It has a little orange in it, a jalapeno, muddled jalapeno and lime, and ginger beer. So close to a mule, but not quite. Anyways, also I love a salt. Gotta have a rim. Cheers. And let's get into talking about our Queen of New Orleans, Norma Wallace. Mom, things are gonna start getting a little bit spicy. So don't blush, and remember, you raised a badass. So hello. I'm sorry. My mom's really like, what the fuck? Why is my daughter talking? I showed my mom She's gonna listen to this. I showed my mom my intro video, and I think she was a bit taken aback. At first she thought I was wearing lingerie, which I am not. I'm wearing a beautiful dress. But yeah, I'm sure as we get into this series and as I loosen up and become more authentically me, and I'm telling you, it's a hard thing to put yourself out here like that. And for someone who has attempted to do YouTube and stuff before, it can be nerve-wracking, I would say, and it takes a little bit to get really authentic. I feel like I'm coming into it though, and I feel like you'll definitely start hearing my voice in my scripts and stuff, especially in this one. I felt like I got very comfortable with how I wanted to talk, and so yeah, Mom, things are gonna get a little spicy, and I hope you don't judge me too much and enjoy the ride and enjoy Norma Wallace. And I hope anyone else out there listening, you also enjoy the ride. And if you liked my video versions thus far, they are only going to get better. So I hope you consider subscribing. And yeah, let's get into Norma, yeah? Cheers. Norma will go on to call the next 10 years the most glamorous time of her life, and oh boy was it. Love, danger, and excitement filled her time while the world continued to do its best to sweep her out of business. Soon after leaving Pete's, she got married for the first time. According to Norma, my first marriage was to Alex Zolman, a racetrack figure. We'll dismiss him because he didn't last long or play an important part of my life, as did the others. And with that, that's all Norma ever said about Alex. Norma was funny like that in her recordings, if you haven't figured it out yet. She wasn't going to waste time including people or stories that she deemed unimportant in her overall glitzy story. I mean, we have to admit, so far Norma's story has been very fascinating, and baby, we are just getting started. But we also have to admit that she omits things from her story, like her time as a child, her couple of years in Bertha Anderson's, and even though Norma married Alex, she deemed him useless in her story. Was it because he just ended up being a dud, or was it something more sinister? I'm not sure if that question will ever be answered, but I am curious nonetheless. What could make Norma write him out altogether, even back then, because she would go on to list Pete as her first husband, and she hasn't even married him yet, but we'll get there. Most people who were close to her wouldn't even know she had married Alex. They would only know Pete as her first husband. Norma would go on to marry 7 more times, but it could be said some of her greatest loves of her life were just love affairs. We learned that in part 1 with Andy Wallace, the one she still carries that scar on her ankle from the bullet, but also the 7-carat ring and his last name, even though no vowels were ever read. Phil Harris, though, well, he was about to stumble his way into Norma's life and then find a way to stay there with his smile and worm his way into her heart with the most laughing Norma has ever done. Phil Harris was the hottest thing back then, and a man of many talents. Actor, comedian, musician, and songwriter. He was headlining the Blue Room for the month of January. The Blue Room was the hottest nightclub of the city and was in the lobby of the Roosevelt. The Blue Room was romantic and swanky and was famous for the Romo's Gin Fizzes and high-end clientele. The fact that Phil Harris got a residency and was headlining the Blue Room meant that he was a big name back then. His show was 10 to 2 nightly. After the show, he and his band had camps to a bar on University. Something fun about digging into the entertainment districts of history is also learning historical lingo. Camps basically meant a long-standing reservation. And it was like the universe was always aligning for Norma as if she was destined for a glamorous life and love affairs, because Louis, not her ex-boyfriend from part 2 or part 1, just so happened to own the bar that Phil Harris had camps at. So on one night, about a week into the band's stay, they were having a particularly wild night and weren't ready to settle down, even when the bar was closing. Louis did what he thought was best. He took the band and Phil Harris down to Norma Wallace's house. Norma took one look at the ruggedly handsome face, lit up bright with this huge smile, and fell in love. Phil was right there with her, though, because Norma just had that way about her. Like all things in Norma's life, she did them big and as glamorous as she could. And with a love affair with a big Hollywood man, was going to be no different. Nightly, Norma would strut down to the blue room that was packed and smoky, and as soon as she walked in, well, the room was hers. All heads turned to her as she strolled towards the safe seats at the front. Once the piano player would see her and her girls coming, he would play "Be Still My Heart," a song by Nat King Cole. And wow, how seductive, and such a perfect song for the Queen Norma. The first act, a ventriloquist would make jokes about going to Delphine to visit the Queen. And of course, Norma would laugh. She loved the attention and the thrill of being the lady of the house. Norma was well known for her reputation preceding her. Every night after the show, Phil and the band would all head over to Norma's, and they would make big pitchers of absinthe that was made with wormwood, which was rumored to make you hallucinate and was banned in 1912. Although it doesn't really actually make you hallucinate, it sure did get you fucked up and made you feel like you were leaving this planet. Back in the day, absinthe would contain 70% alcohol, which is 140 proof. It was not messing around. They would all hang out telling jokes, playing music. Phil even wrote a song for Norma called "Queens Drink Absinthe in New Orleans." Phil was able to make her laugh like nobody else, and she absolutely loved all the attention he gave her. Norma would also take him out to her farm in Pearl, the one that she bought her dad and inherited when he passed, Shady Pond Farm. This farm is still operating today. And if you go to the website, they talk about how her passion for the land was the foundation to what the farm is still today. She had horses out there that she had bought during a health scare, which turned out to be nothing, but she continued to make horse riding part of her life. She loved riding those horses, and Phil loved being with her. They sometimes would even bring out Norma's girls and Phil's bandmates, and they would just have what we like to call nowadays a house party. They all just had a blast together. But like all love affairs, this one was never destined to last, as Norma knew that Phil was married. In his words, unhappily, but the real problem was his life was in Hollywood and her life was in New Orleans. Phil's show got extended through February, allowing the couple to live in bliss for a while longer. When his show ended in New Orleans, he came back for 2 more shows. And Norma, she would go on to see him in Cincinnati, Dallas, and Los Angeles in between his stays in New Orleans. They would stay a few nights together until Norma had to go back to her business. Even though Phil and his wife did divorce soon after he met Norma, Norma never allowed herself to think she could have him permanently, because Norma didn't want to give up her life in New Orleans, her career, power, and influence. People knew who Norma was in NOLA, she was the queen on Delphine. Even though Phil does eventually move on to marry a woman named Faye, he and Norma keep in touch, and eventually the love faded into the background to a really beautiful friendship. Phil loved New Orleans also, so he was constantly visiting, and every time he was in town, Norma and him would get together for coffee or a drink, talk and laugh a whole bunch. Norma claims him one of her greatest loves of her life. As fate would have it, Phil wasn't the only love Louis was going to bring into her life, and one night, Louis called Norma, asking her to send one of her best girls, one who was a smart cookie and one that had athletic capabilities. Norma felt this Valdelia sounded like trouble, so she wanted to send her smartest girl. So she sent Eileen. Eileen left 410 Delphine at around midnight. She didn't return back to Norma's until late the following afternoon. She went straight to Norma and said, "Norma, I ain't going back out with that man again." She told Norma that he was mean and he scared her because a word around town was that he was from Chicago and he had connections to Al Capone. Norma calmed Eileen down, letting her know she wouldn't be making her go back, nor would she make any of her girls go. So when this man called back the same night for Eileen, he was shocked when she let him know that she nor any of her girls would be doing business with him anymore. Norma, being pretty experienced in the game by now, wasn't surprised when he couldn't handle being told no. He lashed out at Norma over the phone. "Why, you little bitch. Nobody talks to Sam Hunt like that and gets away with it." Norma, smirking into the phone with strength in her voice, replied, "Well, I just did Sam Hunt, and I'm getting away with it. And you can go to hell." So angry from someone not only telling him no, but also talking to him as if he was an authority. And plus, it was a woman doing it. Oh, he was not happy. And he bet out, "Well, we'll see about that. I'm coming over there to beat your teeth in." Huffing back, she said, "You just better try that," and hung up on him. Even though Norma really didn't expect Sam Hunt from Chicago to show up at her place, she prepared just in case, though, grabbing her 410 shotgun and carrying it around the house with her all day. When hours had passed and no show from the big bad man from Chicago, Norma felt safe to put her gun away finally. Just as soon as the gun was put up, that was when two men strolled into her parlor room. Norma knew which one was Sam Hunt right away, with his frosty blue eyes and the meanest look she'd ever seen on someone. She prepared herself for a fight that she no longer was equipped for, but she was a bit shocked when instead she was hit with a soft request to sit and have a drink. Norma, always one for a little bit of danger and no longer having a gun on her, brought him to her bar, where he drank a B&B and never took his eyes off of her. And after a while, Norma forgot that she was angry with him. They sat and drank, talking late into that night. And again, Norma sparked a fire in the heart of another bad boy, and she herself couldn't help but fall. They spent a whole week together, going to dinner nightly, dancing and drinking. And every night, they would go back to Norma's room for the sweetest cuddling session. Sam wouldn't make love to her. He would just hold her, pet her, and snuggle her. At a certain point, Norma started to wonder if he was normal. One night, she decided to finally just ask him why. He told her, "Norma, I'll never lay you until I know you actually care for me, so I know you're not just turning another trick with me." Norma, not getting offended by that, chose to try and continue to show she cared for him. That loyalty would come into question, though, because Louis, the one who owned the bar, the one who introduced her to him, accidentally really, started letting her know that Sam Hunt could be very mean and very spiteful, and he wanted her to be careful. Not only that, but she started to learn more and more about who Sam Hunt truly was and his affiliation with Al Capone. Word around town was spreading about Sam Hunt's nickname, which was Golf Ball Hunt or Golf Ball Sam, given to him because he was known to carry a golf bag with his machine gun inside. He was known to be one of Al Capone's enforcers. And I'm sure I don't have to explain to you who Al Capone was. Norma, though, could care less about his choice of career and who he worked for. During the many late nights they spent cuddling, Sam told her he was unhappily married as well, but he hadn't gotten a divorce because he had a daughter that he loved very much, and he didn't want her to be taken away from him. Norma was smitten with him, though. So when he asked her to go with him to San Antonio for the races, she said yes, of course. The day they were supposed to leave, Norma was waiting at the train station for Sam and continued to wait. The train started loading passengers and he still wasn't there. Getting on the train and worried that Sam might have stood her up, she still waited. When the train started preparing to leave the station without Sam, she continued to wait for him. And it was at that moment when Sam Hunt came booking it, jumping onto the departing train. So when Sam found Norma waiting for him in their suite, trusting him enough to not leave the train when he had been running late, this was all the proof that he needed that she cared for him. Norma already knew he could be mean and had already told her he was unhappily married, but he had a daughter and loved her dearly, and she knew he may be a dangerous man, but Norma never shied away from a little danger. In fact, she craved it. Norma and Sam went all the way that night on the train. They were in love. Sam took Norma to Chicago to show her his stomping grounds. Al Capone was in Alcatraz at the time of her visit, but she met his brother, who ran a house as well with many women in it. Wasn't as glamorous as hers, though. They would all be in bras and shorts, and Norma said it was ran like they were working an assembly line, which is the seedy side of some of these establishments, especially the ones ran by men who were just icky, just all around seedy and dark. When Norma and Sam were in Chicago, they never traveled alone. He always had another man following them. And that was a little weird to her, but she was just like, okay, I guess this is the price to pay to be with a dangerous man. After they were finished in Chicago, they decided to go on another vacation alone in Hot Springs, Arkansas, a big gambling town. And everyone there knew Sam. They were passionate with each other. But that passion wasn't always hot. Every time they had to depart each other's company, they would fight hard. And then every time they were back in each other's company, they would make up even harder. That kind of love continued for a while until eventually it morphed. They started becoming jealous and distrustful of each other. Sam was married, but he wasn't willing to share Norma. And so one day when Norma took Sam to the airport and got him on the plane, she was walking back. She ran into a pilot, a friend, and an ex-lover. But that was long in the past for her and Norma, for him and Norma. She never, ever fell out with lovers. She just didn't. They had a small conversation, her and that pilot friend, and Sam Hunt watched from the seat of his plane. Luckily, he wasn't able to disembark the plane, and Norma left with not thinking much of it, and she drove to her farm in Pearl, where she planned to stay the night. She was just drifting off to sleep when she heard a car pull up. Looking out the window, she recognized Philip, Sam's driver and closest friend. So she yelled out, "Sam, is that you? What the hell are you doing?" She knew what he was doing. He'd seen her with that pilot. and thought the worst of her. He about broke the door off the hinges to get into the house, searching the entire place, floor to ceiling, to see if another man was in her bed. Norma didn't have another man in her bed, and she knew better to be messing around on a man like Sam. He was the type of man to see her talk to someone, fly home, immediately turn back around, get on the first flight back to New Orleans with a bug in his ear. Nothing could make him believe her, and that turned into the worst fight they ever had. He flew back home that day. Now, I don't have much information about this flight, but on the Shady Ponds Farm website, it does say that this is the place Sam Hunt tried to kill Norma, and Norma does not mention that. Norma sometimes shied away from bad parts of her story, but she never shied away from Andy Wallace shooting her. So I think if he had, it would have been mentioned, but I'm not sure. I don't know all the details. I wish I could find out more. But I know that they had a bad fight. But Philip was there, and Philip was his friend and made sure to try to keep Sam's temper in check. So he got that. He basically, I'm assuming, separated them. He flew back home, and they didn't talk. After 4 days went by, with radio silence, Norma started to come to terms and realization that she was in love with a lunatic gangster. And if she wasn't careful, it could get her killed. Norma, not knowing exactly what she should do, turned to a longtime friend and lover, Pete Herman. Pete, who, since they had split, had gone on to get married and have 2 daughters, and then also become a widow. Norma and Pete had stayed very close since their separation, and they were still doing business together. So Pete listened to her troubles about Sam and told her he had the perfect solution. He proposed to her, and Norma, well, she decked him in the face, smiling. She loved Pete, but she was no longer in love with Pete. Looking back on the decision to jump into marriage with Pete, she could reflect that it was more a reflection on her emotional upset with Sam, the man she was deeply in love with, the man she could never marry. Not because he was a mobster, married, had a kid. No, it was because Sam wanted more of her than she was willing to give up. He wanted Norma to be his woman. Norma was nobody's woman but her own, and marrying Pete, though, only proved to be a very dangerous move. I don't understand why she didn't realize it was going to be worse if she just up and jumped into marriage with another man, but we are not sure. I think it was slightly oh, I don't know. I'm really confused on why she decided to just be like, I know I've been seen and fucking around with a gangster who is very mean and spiteful, but I'm just gonna jump into marriage with my ex, who I cannot tell you what she was thinking, but you know what? She did it. Pete and Norma married July 28th, 1936. When news of the marriage found its way back to Sam in Chicago, he was furious. He knew Pete. He had spent a lot of money at Pete's, with and without Norma. This felt like a betrayal to him. As we would learn, he was ruthless and found anything to be a betrayal. He called Norma up and threatened her, letting her know he was coming to New Orleans. Norma, though, she hoped that he was just drunk and would sleep it off and move on. She didn't worry too much about it. However, Sam didn't sleep it off. He was upset and hurt, and he had to deal with it in a physical way, because that's the only way he knew how to cope. He arrived back in New Orleans and went to the bar and started drinking his B&Bs, where he talked himself into a good idea and plan. He went over to Norma's, ready to make her pay. Luck was always on Norma's side, though, because she was not at her house. She was at her farm with Pete. Jackie called Norma to let her know Sam was there, and he was drunk and still drinking more. He also had a gun on him. Jackie told her she should probably not come home that night, and she would handle Sam, who at the moment was trying to light her couch on fire. Norma felt that once he sobered up, his friends would talk some sense into him, and he would go back home. Sam eventually did leave Norma's, realizing that she wasn't heading home, and Norma and Pete returned back to the French quarters. Monday went by normally, and at about 1 a.m., Norma left 410 Delphine to walk over to Pete's. And stepping off her stairs, she almost didn't see the car that suddenly turned on its headlights and floored it. Had she not been able to step up onto her stairs again, the car would have hit her. She recognized Sam in that driver's seat right away. Norma got back inside before he could attempt it again. She immediately also called Pete to let him know that Sam may be on his way over. She also called Philip, Sam's driver and closest friend, so that he could come and help talk Sam down. Before Philip could get there, though, Sam made it to Pete's lounge and started firing, nearly missing Pete. Richie, Pete's friend and marksman, immediately started firing back, and a shootout ensued. When Philip got there, he grabbed Sam and calmed him down, and all the action came to an end. Miraculously, nobody got hurt that night. Philip got Sam on a plane and back home. Norma, she quietly mourned the loss of her love, but at least she would have the memories of him, and she would hold those close to her heart. The hole in Burgundy would remind her of him for years to come. Less than a year into marriage, Norma decided to move back to 410 Delphine. The only issue with that was that she decided not to tell Pete she was moving out. Things weren't going well in their marriage. As Norma puts it, we were at a point we didn't have fun anymore. We mostly tried to buck each other. We were antagonistic to each other. The problem was jealousy. The Dahlias really can be something. They want a wife that's a madam and a nun and all the saints combined. And I don't think I was capable of it. Jealousy was the problem. They were both fooling around in each other. And they both could dish it, but neither one of them could take it. Of course, when Pete found out that she had moved out of the house and back into 410 Delphine, he was shocked and hurt. And when he filed for divorce, he listed Bill Caver as the reason. We will get back to Bill in a minute. Although Pete was hurt over what Norma did, they were eventually able to forgive each other and remain great friends and business partners. Now, remember what I said about Norma and the men she chose to marry at the top of the episode? Well, let me introduce you to Bill Caver. He was a seaman that Norma started seeing right around the time she was separating from Pete, or maybe before she separated from Pete. She would go on to marry Bill and describe their marriage as nice enough. They were married for 6 years. At that time, Norma had bought a house at 512 Governor Nicholas Street, and that was pretty much all we really needed to know about Bill as well. News traveled back to Chicago about Norma's separation, and her hot-tempered lover sent her a gift, a diamond watch on a gold chain. When Norma received it, her heart fluttered, and she went out and reciprocated by sending him a gold money clip with his initials engraved it. Just like that, Sam Hunt was at her doorsteps and back into her life as if he never tried to kill her. The love affair picked up as if it had never come to a wild end. In 1938, Norma had become part of the push to restore the French quarters because she didn't want to see the historical housing torn down and the land be used for housing development, which was starting to get rumored that might happen. She loved the French quarters and felt that it should be restored even though it was showing its age. When she had been with Pete, Norma had found the perfect house at 1026 Conti Street. It was on the corner of Conti and North Rampart, and it was a perfect parlor house. Right across the street from a bus station, giving her house a perfect access to all the tourism coming in. Norma knew she could be successful because Julia Washington had been running a house at 1012 20 Conti Street successfully for years. This 1830s townhouse offered a ton of possibilities, with 16 rooms and the room to make her own apartment that was separate from the main going-ons of the house. On top of that, what added to the mystique of the house was it used to belong to a famous photographer, Ernest Belloc. He was well known and famous for his photography on the prostitutes of Storyville. The best part of the house, though, was the secret space in the main parlor. It was the perfect hideout. Norma wanted the house bad, but it was also in horrible condition. She didn't want to see it get torn down and just knew she had to have it. Norma normally got what she wanted, and this time was no different. As rumors would have it, Sam Hunt was the one who got her this house. Even though Norma doesn't say either way, it is likely that he did, because Dreamy has come to say hello. So you might hear her purring a little bit. It was likely that he did because around this time, she also bought her mom a house. She would say that she only had money for her mom's house. So whether she was given the house or did have the money for both, she got the property and got it for pretty cheap. $45,000 for a 16-bedroom parlor house. Again, never gonna see those prices ever. Who are they? Norma and Sam would go on to start putting in a lot of work to get her new home up to par. All while Sam continued to spoil her with jewelry, furs, and clothes. When it finally came down to furnish the house, Sam helped with that as well. Norma said, as always, Sam was generous. And she was in that house by New Year's Eve. But it wasn't going to be happily ever after for Norma and Sam, and New Year's Eve would cement that. Sam really wanted to go out that night, but Norma could not. She had to work. She had a full house, and she couldn't afford to leave. Norma would say, I was there to keep down any beef. Even with my love life or any other problems, I never neglected my business. That's one of the reasons I lasted as long as I did. So Sam went out by himself and found himself at Louis' drinking B&B. Coming back to Norma's, though, what he found unleashed that barely checked anger. When he walked in, Norma was on the lap of another man who had just pulled her in his lap a few minutes prior, and she had stayed to talk. Norma, not thinking much of anything because she was the madam of the house. She didn't turn tricks, but she was an entertainer. Sam, however, couldn't see that, and all he saw was her in the man's lap laughing. Sam came in and cursed her out in front of her full house. Norma, who didn't scare easily and now very pissed off that he came in and acted a fool in front of her clients, she defied him and basically stood her ground and stared him down until he threw her keys at her and stormed off. He didn't go far, though, because he was hurt and angry, and he needed to deal with that the only way he knew how, and that was violently. He returned and started to destroy the house. He also beat up two of the cabbies that were out just sitting and waiting for their Vidalias to be done with their business. He then stormed into the house, kicking everyone out, even the half-dressed or the ones in the middle of their pleasure. He didn't care. If anyone tried to push back, he would basically physically remove them. Norma watched it all go down, and she knew this was her final straw with Sam Hunt. She was pissed that he came into her place of business and caused a scene, not once, but twice, on one of her busiest nights of the year. One thing you didn't do to Norma was mess with her business. By this time, she had been in the game for years and had worked at gaining a reputation for a safe house. In Norma's words, don't fool with my business. After Sam kicked everyone out and was satisfied that Norma couldn't be messing around on him, he went back to Louis for more B&Bs. More liquor and already no coping skills to his anger and hurt, he told Louis he was going to go back and finish Norma off. Once Sam left, Louis called Norma and told her he was worried for her and Sam was heading her way and she should call the cops. Norma, though, knew better than to call the law on a man like Sam. So when he arrived back at 1026 Conti, she opened the door to him and he hit her in the face. He immediately recoiled from himself and was devastated. Norma took him back into the parlor and held him while he cried. At around that time, the police arrived and asked Norma if she needed any help or if she was in any trouble. They had heard about what had happened earlier that night, but Norma told them no, she was fine, and they all could go back to work. Upon returning to the parlor, Sam, ever the romantic, said, "Darling, you didn't have me arrested. Why?" She didn't have him arrested because she knew that the love affair was officially over for her. Nothing could come in between her and her passion. That night, they stayed up a long time talking, and by the morning Sam left. They had decided they were not meant for each other, and if they were to stay together, something bad was bound to happen. They never saw each other again after that. But for Norma, it was a good love affair. Never a dull moment. Sam Hunt would die a few years later in a shootout in Chicago. Around this time, World War II was starting, and Norma, well, she was making a killing again due to a lot of the servicemen choosing to take their leave in the French quarters. With Norma's house right next to the bus station, she was happy to welcome them to the Big Easy. Business was so good that sometimes Norma's house would have lines of soldiers waiting for a girl. At this time, Norma had 30 girls who would turn 5 to 6 tricks a day. That's not even including the regular customers. Norma was making a lot of money. She was probably making around 100,000 a year at this time, but Norma learned her lesson about banks back when the market crashed. So no banks for Norma, and she stashed her life savings in a loose brick somewhere in Conti she never gave the location of. During the first half of the 1940s, Norma is putting much of her money into Conti, restoring and making some updates. She put full bathrooms in each of the rooms. In her personal apartment, she added a black marble bidet. She also had her fireplace in the parlor stripped of its dull green paint and etched with beautiful gold leaf. She opened a private bar in her house, and outside she made her courtyard a tropical paradise with those big floppy leaf trees. She also had a toucan and a couple of foul-mouthed parrots. Another thing she did was get a few paintings made of Jackie and a couple of the other girls, fully nude. She also commissioned and bought some nudes and hung them all around her bordello. She made the whole place cozy, welcoming, and of course, very seductive. Something silly she did to add even more of a mystique and story to her house was she bought a bed off of Bertha Anderson. A bed that supposedly came from the heart of Storyville and belonged to the infamous Josie Arlington. It was made of brass and draped in red silk. It was a canopy bed, and at the top of the bed, there was a mirror. Norma loved it, and she put it in her room. But after sleeping under it, it didn't take Norma long to move it out. I looked up into it and thought, oh Christ, this is 30 years too late. So she had some electric lights added to it and moved the bed to her showroom upstairs, placing it on a revolving floor. So even though it isn't for sure it came from Josie's house, nobody was going to question it with a description like that. In 1945, with the new election coming up, things weren't looking so hot for Robert Maestries. Under his rule, gambling and prostitution were thriving. As he became more comfortable with his power, he started letting vice and corruption be on full display. And with the new election coming up in 1945, Maestries was overly confident in his ability to win. He rarely did campaigning or any public speaking for his second election, and kind of just had this attitude as if he had already won. He was, for some reason, not at all worried about his opponent, who was gaining some favor in the public eye. Morrison, his running opponent, had something on his side that often was underestimated. That was the silk stockings, ladies who were eager to do all they could to get corruption out of their city. Chet Morrison ran his campaign emphasizing the need to clean up the corruption that Robert Maestri was almost flaunting he was the king of. The silk stockings would march the night before the election with signs that said, "Women for Morrison," and also walking the streets with brooms, basically to send the message that Morrison was going to sweep the dirt out of the city. Well, Maestries had thought he bought his way into the next election, but he did not, and Chet Morrison won. So the year of 1946 was a scary time for the landladies at the French Quarters. He was going to clean up the city, the town's new hope for the true vice cleanup. The city wanted the corruption out, and Chet was the one to finally give it to them. The ladies of the French Quarter were all sure they were going to be eaten alive with him taking over. What most people didn't know was that Chet Morrison's biggest backer was Cody Morrison. No, not his brother, totally not related. Cody, though, he was a wealthy man, another lawyer who also had a pretty damn good side hustle. You know what I'm about to say his side hustle was in. That's right, Chet Morrison's backer had a business in the sex trade. He wasn't only his biggest backer, but he would also go on to have all his girls go out and vote for Morrison. Not only that, but the Morrisons had it all worked out, the perfect plan to benefit both of them. When he took office, they made a big show of shutting down Cody's house, showing the city that Chet had meant business, that he was making changes and cleaning up right away. And the ladies, well, that scared them, which made them kind of ground their business, at least for a bit, allowing Cody to have a very unique opportunity when he immediately opened back up with just a little extra business to bring his way, thanks to the ladies thinking an anti-vice sweep was going to be gearing up. Chet had paid Cody Morrison $40,000 to make sure that that he was not only free to operate, but that he would be one of the only ones free to operate. Norma and him battled for a bit, but Norma, seeing that in this election she hadn't gotten the upper hand or the right people on her side. But just like a lot of Norma's life, it was like the universe knew she needed a distraction. And for Norma, nothing was better of a distraction than men. Norma meets Charles McCoy, a police officer from Washington, D.C., who was stationed on shore patrol. And one day, well, like most men, he found himself stumbling his way to 1026 Conti Street. At this time, Norma was about 45 years old and Charles was about 10 years younger. He was handsome, and Norma, well, you know by now, she fell hard again. Like we know Norma to be, she had him in love as well, even though he too had a family and a job. But he was willing to leave it all behind for Norma. Norma was also married still, but, well, when Norma wanted something, she got it. Or had someone make it happen for her. She put her lawyer on it and was able to get her out of her current marriage and even got McCoy out of the service. She was ready for some domesticity. domesticity, because she shut down her shop at 1026 Conti Street. She had put too much time and love into that house and was in no way ready to part with her house. So she moved out to the farm in Pearl, sold off some of her other properties, and listed Conti under a different name, Norma Lindsay, and had her mom move in to supposedly run it as a rooming house, while Norma and McCoy went domestic. Norma told her friends and family that she was leaving the business for McCoy's sake, and she had herself almost convinced that this was the start to her retirement. Okay, I had to take a small break there because my battery died. And with these longer episodes, I had to get a new battery because with the longer episodes, my battery does not last the whole time. So, next goal, I guess. Anyways, I made a new drink. This one's spicier, so if I start sweating, and that is why. The last one was not spicy enough. The spicier, the better over here for me. Okay, so, yes. All right, let's get back to it. Norma told her friends and family that she was leaving the business for McCoy's sake, and she had herself almost convinced that this was the start to her retirement. Norma believed herself for a while and threw herself into the life of a housewife. McCoy wanted a dairy farm, so Norma took her money that she got from selling some of her other properties and bought him a wedding gift of 500 dairy cows. Miss McCoy liked to can while her new man was out doing the dairy farm thing. She also would teach herself to become an excellent sharpshooter. She never lost touch, though, with her friends in the French Quarter, like Peter and Gasper, telling herself she wasn't waiting for the all clear or anything. But years started to pass and the political climate pretty much stayed the same, and she was starting to get very bored of canning. So one day, 5 years after moving and retiring from the game, and things going slightly bad at the farm with the livestock dwindling and McCoy's poor management skills, Norma let him know that she decided she was selling the farm and they were moving back to New Orleans. She wanted to go back to her old life, the one she worked so hard for and understood, the one that didn't get boring and had danger and action and excitement. So she did what she said. She sold the farm to the brother of a rumored kingpin of New Orleans, Marcello. In Norma's words, she felt he stole it from her because he got her to let go of the property for a lot less than she should have. McCoy made a dire threat heading back to New Orleans. If you ever get in trouble, go to jail, I'll leave you. He loved Norma, and money wasn't important to him. He just wanted her to be his wife and be safe and not in trouble. In late 1949, she made her way back to New Orleans. Without a doubt, I picked the single worst time to return to New Orleans. Chet Morris had been mayor for nearly 4 years, and the city was singing his praises. He was giving the city a much-needed makeover, building projects, forging international trade programs, and making big improvements like garbage trucks instead of the mules, which, when I read that, I was like, what? When you go back into history and just hear something that just like throws you, like just like slaps you in the face with a reminder that in the 40s they didn't have garbage trucks, they still had mules taking their garbage away. Welcome to 1949. We have got garbage trucks now. That's so silly to me. Anyways. Morrison, though, had his eyes set on bigger political career moves. His promise to end vice in the French Quarter was kind of falling in priority for him. Morrison also was allowing Gaspar Galato to keep an eye on things in the French Quarter, which Gaspar was known as the Bourbon Street Mayor, the little mayor of Bourbon Street. Nothing happened in the French Quarter unless Gaspar okayed it. Remember, Gaspar is Pete's brother and a longtime friend of Norma's. During this time, bordellos and brothels were under attack still. The city wanted to prohibit taxis on Bourbon Street. They also were calling for tougher laws against prostitution, wanted mandatory jail sentences for prostitutes and the patrons. With the attack on the sex trade, madams of New Orleans were panicking and moving uptown, including Norma. So when she came back, she kept her 1026 Conti Street, but she got a place uptown as well. Things started to ease off on the madams, and Norma continued to operate uptown. She made improvements to her place at 1026. She put in kitchens, air conditioners, and she also started turning each room into an apartment. She didn't think people would want to rent from her because people knew who Norma was, knew about that house. It had a reputation all on its own. However, with the musicians that came into the French Quarter, they were more than happy to rent rooms within 1026 Conti. It was so close to their job. Norma was smart to do this because politically, things were getting squirrely. In the 1950s, New Orleans had a big, huge police scandal. I mean, it was bound to happen, right? On November 15th, 1950, a report came out attacking Morrison and the police, stating there was no real crackdown happening within the French quarters, and because this article claimed that there was 17 houses of prostitution that were being police protected, as well as over 100 handbook places, which were gambling places. This caused a huge scandal to break as it came out that New Orleans city officials and cops were taking graft. This article even claimed Chet Morrison to be taking graft. So this was a big scandal as he was the one who ran his campaign on sweeping out vice and corruption. This then led for a very interesting investigation where a lot of people were called out to testify in front of a grand jury. One of those people who got called on was no one other than our Queen Norma Wallace. Norma's arrest record from her earlier time running a house in like the 20s was cited, and as many other madams were also called in front of the grand jury, and their police records also being used as evidence against them. And this was to show that from 1920s to 1950s, little had changed. They were basically trying to prove that if the police wanted to do something about the vice, they could have by now. Mayor Morrison went on to defend his police crew, though, claiming they were all underpaid and most officers were good and this was just rumors, which then caused for more investigation and more people being called in to testify in front of a grand jury. Cohn, who was the one investigating the corruption within the New Orleans political party, goes on to gather as many witnesses against the likes of Norma, the other madams, Morrison, and even Gaspar. One of the witnesses he called to the stand was an ex-employee of Norma and also an ex-employee of plenty of the other madams within the French Quarter. When she got on stand, she said a lot. She also made a huge claim stating that 9 out of 10 men present within the room at the time were customers of Norma's. Though that was probably 100% true, Morrison jumped up right away and denied it and told her she had no right and needed to stick to the facts, only things she could prove. Morrison was a master at double talk and highly criticized Aaron Cohn for his witnesses and called in question their character and motivation on testifying. Gasper and Elmo also both had to testify. Gasper had a great time on the stands, having a nimble tongue and mental agility. Years later, when Gasper actually ends up passing, two of his casket bearers, included former police chief George Wire from part 1, and Chet Morrison. So things were looking kind of sketchy still if you were living your life in the Vice in the New Orleans during this time. New Orleans also called in a new police chief, Captain Joseph Gio, aka Big Mo, whose voice boomed. He was sent into the city to break the quarter loose. So Norma, well, she got a day job, or at least that's what she liked to call it. During the day, she would get ready, dress down, make herself look like a sweet old grandma, and go down to the coffee shop where all the new cadets and cops would gather to have a little coffee break. This is where she would study the cops and the new cop recruits. Coming into the force, she would study their faces, she would know their names, she would get to know them pretty much. She was spying on them. And so this was so she could recognize a cop if they tried to roll up on her door, even the new ones coming out of the police academy. But by 1953, Norma realized she was one of the last operating madams. All the other ladies had pretty much closed up shop because they were scared. So Norma decided that it was time for maybe her to close up shop. Norma decided that she would sell her other home she'd been operating out of and keep her Conti as a rental for the Blue Room musicians that she was currently renting to. She bought another house for her and McCoy and was looking at a real retirement this time because the political climate was not great, and they were constantly being called in front of a grand jury. This was a huge police scandal that they were dealing with. So that's what they did. She was chilling pretty much. Semi-retired, I guess she would say. But one day, Norma was out and about when she ran into one of the good men on Canal Street. When he said to her, "Norma, why don't you call me a girl?" She knew she shouldn't, but she had to cheat just a little. Cheat was her term for when she arranged tricks during times of intense police activity. She would have to cheat whenever Mac was out playing golf, though. He didn't have a clue about anything until one day, out of the blue, Norma kicked everyone out of her 1026 Conti Street and went back to business because, well, Big Mo was doing all the landladies a huge favor because he ran out all of the pimps out of the French quarters. The rest of the landladies thought this was great news, and that Big Mo was a good policeman. Landladies thought this meant business as usual. A lot of them were so happy they sent Big Mo Christmas gifts. Norma, though, did not. She didn't know him well enough, and you never wanted to call your man wrong, because if you did, you went to jail. Well, Big Mo was not happy with all of those Christmas gifts and presents. He hauled them all back to them. That was the night the inspection started. He looked at everything. Nothing didn't get touched. He would come to Norma's at all hours of the night, arriving with his partner, a teeny policeman that Norma was confused on how he even made the police squad. They would tap on her walls. Sometimes they would be there for hours. These inspections became routinely, often once a week. Big Mo definitely suspected that Norma had a hideout, and Norma, well, she was afraid he was actually going to fucking find it. And because of this was when Norma decided that it was time for an upgrade. Her carpenter made a door so flush and perfect that it was nearly impossible to see. She also put more tropical trees into the ones with the big beautiful leaves around her hideout. So you really had to know what you were looking for to find this. She also had a buzzer installed. That way the girls that were stationed at the window, often Jackie, looked out if she spotted anything suspicious. She would ring the buzzer, which meant to the others to get everyone in the hideout. Norma also created a system of spies who would watch Big Mo, let her know when he was away from the area. She also rented the condemned building on the corner of North Rampart Street so that the girls could also escape at the gates on the end of the street on Conti and wait in this building until inspections were over. Norma had to run an even more discreet operation. So she also had a little sliding glass window door thing. It wasn't really a window, but it was like a sliding glass little thing you can open up and look out. Not too big, put into her door so that she could see who was at her door. She could question them. They could talk, before she actually let them in. So one day when a house regular came through, he was super drunk and he knocked on the door. Norma opened her little sliding glass window and said to him, "You idiot, don't you see that policeman across the street?" He whined, "But Norma, I want to come in." Norma slammed that window in his face, turning to Jackie, saying, "Tricks don't have licks of brains." Norma would go on to be arrested 3 more times in 1953 by none other than Big Mo himself. He would personally take her down to be booked. One of these times that Norma was taken in by Big Mo, the young sergeant doing the booking with Big Mo asked Norma her age, and as usual, Norma lied and said cheekily 38. Big Mo, though, wasn't letting her get away with that, and laughed and said, "Oh, come on, you old bitch. You're as old as I am. Don't tell that boy that." Smirking, Norma, looking at Big Mo, sighed and said, "Okay, 47. Big Mo laughed some more, but let her get away with that one. Norma made $100 bail that night and was home with the night still young. And you've guessed it, business as usual. On October 13th, 1953, the story was on the front page of the Times-Picayune. The next time she was arrested, he got her 4 days later in a surprise ambush. He had that door down before anyone could respond to the buzzer. As always, though, Norma didn't spend a night behind bars. During this time as well, Elmo was running a nightclub called the Moulin Rouge, and he would often call his sister to ask if he could send over a date. On this night, though, Norma thought it best if she sent a girl to the Roosevelts. Big Mo just so happened to be driving by when he saw her as she was just about to enter the lobby. When he stopped her, of course, he arrested her and booked her. When Norma got the call, she said to Jackie, "That man can smell a whore," as she and Jackie went to pay the girl's fines and get her out of jail. After a bit, Big Mo did start catching on to Norma's spies and started sabotaging them. She would get the call for the all clear from one, and then the next minute another spy would call and let her know he was in the area. She had to train her girls to act fast. They would only have a couple of minutes to get into that hideout. Norma and Big Mo were definitely in a war. Big Mo told Norma once that he would never frame her, but if he caught her, he was going to get her good. Norma said, "Oh, I believe you, Captain." But unlike Captain Theodore Ray, it wasn't hatred that was driving Big Mo's war. No, Norma had been a part of this game for way too long not to recognize the sexual tension that was flying between the two. Norma knew that Big Mo was interested in her. Norma knew all the signs, but so far he hadn't made a move on her. So the cat and mouse game was exciting. Big Mo made it exciting for her. Except for one night when Big Mo gave her heart a bigger scare than even he knew. Because Norma had a very special customer who would come every Saturday night. He would come in and take one girl right after another. 5 or 6 of them. He would buy drinks for everyone and he ran up a big bill. However, he wasn't the usual customer. This man was a good man with a wife and a family uptown. When he came to visit Norma and took the girls upstairs, it wasn't to sleep with them. He wanted to dress up in their clothes and dance around with them. After a few weeks of him coming to Norma's regularly, he had pretty much ruined most of the girls' clothes. So Norma took it upon herself to go buy him his own wardrobe that he could fit into, and she even got him a wig. He would come Saturday, dress up, drink, dance, spend the night being a woman, then masturbate after the last dance, pay, and went home. This man amazed Norma. He was a good man, wealthy, and so she thought maybe he was gay and just was too afraid to ask if she could get him the hookup. So Norma, she didn't mind and had friends who were gay and people who she knew she could connect him with. So one day she told him she had a lot of people she could call, including a cabbie that was so big down there that they had nicknamed him Frankenstein. Frankenstein liked to make money on the side at Norma's any time she needed a man for a woman or a man. He didn't mind. The good man, though, turned her down. He didn't want to sleep with a man at all. All he wanted was to look in the mirror and see a girl. On this particular Saturday, with her good man in the house, Big Mo came knocking. Norma got her good man into the hideout just in time for Big Mo to bust into the house. Jackie, who at this point still worked for Norma in the house but wasn't hooking any longer, she would work the doors a lot of the time when Norma couldn't, or just dance. She at this time was living with the doctor who she had been seeing. She had Jackie run upstairs and hide her good man's clothes. So when Big Mo found her in the courtyard, he asked what she was doing there. Jackie said to Big Mo, "Well, Captain, I live here. You can't arrest a girl for living in a house, you know. You have to have some kind of reason to arrest her." And Big Mo that night was in a mood to flirt with Norma, or at least their version of flirting. He went through that house more that night than he ever had. He was way more thorough this time around, and he was on his P's and Q's. He was looking. He even accepted the damn drink Norma offered, when in previous times always turned her down. He enjoyed said drink, taking a seat in the courtyard right by the hideout. Norma was freaking out internally. She couldn't stop thinking about her girls in the hideout, sitting there for hours. When she was finally able to get her girls out of the hideout, she thought for sure the good girl was going to go running to never be seen again. But to Norma's surprise, when getting out of the hideout, the good girl was excited, squealing, "Madeline, a real girl in a real raid." The night continued on as if that had never happened. The following week, though, Norma was still unsure that Madeline would come back. She assumed she would get home and the adrenaline would wear off and she would freak and they would never see Madeline again. Just in case, though, Norma went out and bought her girl the biggest pair of prettiest red high heels she could find. So that Saturday when Madeline came through Norma's door, she let out a sigh of relief and gifted her with her new heels. Madeline was in love and went on to dance and drink the night away. This is one of my favorite stories that Norma tells about some of her clients. I love the stories that just prove that even historically, we still see people trying to be free to be themselves, even if they had to keep it very under wraps. And that's why houses were so beautiful, because they weren't just always offering sex. They were offering companionship, acceptance, and love in a different way, a way to be who you needed to be without judgment, without having to worry. Norma allowed this man, who probably very much loved his wife and his family, to have this part of himself in a safe environment. It's beautiful. In 1954, Norma was 53 years old, and it was a memorable year for her. She bought the property on Wagaman, where she and McCoy made some good friends. In 1954 was also the year that called in front of a grand jury for the second time. This also made front page news in the Times-Picayune. Mac was starting to get really uncomfortable with his wife making the front page news, though. He was really pressuring her to give up her business, although he also would often be the chauffeur for girls in his black Buick. He too was also arrested twice in connection to prostitution, though those records disappeared. So when Norma bought her new place in Wagaman, which was 10 acres, 20 minutes car ride from the French Quarters to get Mac away from all the heat, the property was romantic with ancient live oaks drifting around the house, a barn that was separate from the main house. They could get horses. It would keep Mac very busy with plenty of fixing up and renovations to do around the house. Norma, however, kept in the back of her mind that this property would be a good house just in case 1026 Conti became too hot. Norma and Mac would go on to introduce themselves in Wagaman as Mr. and Mrs. Peterson. They had two sets of neighbors. They had a family next to them, which was a mom, dad, and a son. The second set was the first family's sister and husband, who, to Norma's dismay, she found out the husband wasn't a cop. Norma did not like that very much. But Norma learned fast that Bubba was the kind of cop she understood. So soon, Norma, Mac, Bubba, and his wife, Elise, became fast friends, spending a lot of time together. Soon they were the only people in town that knew Norma's real name and understood the reason behind covering it up. Norma would also hire Elise's nephew, who lived next to them, to help out on some grounds work. And he was 14, and he liked Norma, and she paid well, so he was happy to help. So on one day when Norma was at her house drinking some martinis, she had Wayne come over to do some work on her flower gardens. This is when Wayne, the 14-year-old, caught her attention by taking his shirt off. And later that evening, she told him that she had something upstairs in her bedroom that needed fixing. When upstairs in the bedroom, Norma let her dress fall off, exposing her breast. That night, Wayne and Norma started a brief love affair, where she would meet him out in the barn. This love affair came to an end pretty quickly, though, when Snapbean, Wayne's grandfather, almost caught them in the act. After that, they were never alone together. Now, I really like Norma, but I will say, I'm not down for this. He's a kid, while you're 54. I understand it was a different time, but gosh darn it, girl, he's a baby. Not cool, Norma. Not cool. Wayne's Uncle Bubba, when he turned 15 or 16, did what all good tribal elders were supposed to do back then and took Wayne down to 1026 Conti. He took him down even in his police car. Bubba, though, had no clue that Wayne had already been initiated by the queen of the house already. That day, Wayne went upstairs with Ruthie, and he was not upstairs very long before he was ready to head home. Bubba was quite shocked and asked him, like, did you get scared kind of thing? But Wayne was like, nah, I finished twice. And so they left. Norma had to hide to make sure that Wayne never seen her because, again, he doesn't know who Norma really is. Only Bubba and Elise did. Wayne would return to the house on his own 2 or 3 more times before Jackie had to stop letting him in because Norma couldn't keep hiding from him. For the next 5 years, he would only see Mrs. Patterson very rarely. In the 50s, Big Mo and Norma would continue to play cat and mouse flirty. Mo would start to have her followed. Norma loved giving her trails the slip. Big Mo then started upping his inspections, so Norma then would just adjust how she operated her house, or she would rent out another house for a bit. Every cop in the precinct and any new recruit was hell-bent on catching Norma. It was like the holy grail to them. Eventually, though, Big Mo does get promoted, and he stays friends with Miss Norma and starts taking graft from her. But with a promotion, a new chief enters the game. Foot? He was not going to be one to flirt with Norma, though. He pretty much hated her and tried like hell in any way to get her in trouble. He really wanted to try to get her on crimes against nature. Crimes against nature is something I had never heard of, so here's the definition if you're like me. The crimes against nature, or a natural act, has historically been a legal term in English-speaking states identifying forms of sexual behavior not considered natural or decent and are legally punishable offensive. Sexual practices that have historically been considered to be crimes against nature include masturbation, sodomy, and bestiality. So now we know that is something that they used against sex workers and gay men. I mean, the only one on that list that actually deserves punishment would be the bestiality. How often was that charge actually being used towards that crime? Ugh, annoying. Foot didn't use the straightforward approach of searching the house. He would try to catch them in sting operations. When that wasn't working, he decided to try to catch Norma a different way. So it was well known that Norma was a regular at a beauty salon going every other afternoon. So Foot decided he was going to send a female officer into the salon. The officer was getting her hair dyed, in Norma words, an ungodly color of red. The next time the officer sees Norma when she's out directing traffic, she walks over to Norma and pretty much asks Norma for a job. Norma, though, already knowing that she was thick with Foots, looked her up and down and said, "Honey, you couldn't even be a maid in my house. You look like death took a holiday." And that was that. Which, poor cop. Meanwhile, Chet Morrison was still under political fire as headlines were accusing him of laxity and called for the removal of his superintendent. Morrison wasn't backing down, nor was he going to pull his superintendent off. So he continued to back him up and defend himself and his police department. But eventually, when things got too politically hot, Morrison has a private conversation with his superintendent, and he will go on to privately retire with full accolades and benefits. Morrison then appoints Aaron Darius as the new superintendent. He was a good religious man who grew up with the best of the silk stockings. Morrison does this to try to prove he was taking vice cleanup seriously still. Although around the city hall, Aaron Darius was not respected, and those within Vice felt that he was just a goon. Darius, though, was actually someone who wanted to take vice and corruption seriously. He continued to do crackdowns and inspections within the quarter. One time he came to Norma's and didn't actually announce himself and kind of scared her in a way. She was used to a certain way the police went about it. He didn't follow that code. And so when he came knocking, Norma didn't know him, so she closed the door on him. He didn't tell her he was a cop or anything. He didn't like that so much. He didn't like that too much. So he went and broke down her door. Even though one of the cops with him told him her front door was always unlocked and he could just walk right in and just announce himself. He didn't care. Norma was home alone that night, and all he got was a tour of her house and all the beautiful nudes that she had displayed within her house. His favorite was one of the naked ladies on a horse. He seemed transfixed with the photo, and when Norma said to him, "Isn't she beautiful?" he responded, "Yes, and so is the horse." He left without caring or helping to fix her door. That wasn't where his rampage ends, though. One night, the district attorney was celebrating his up-and-coming wedding. A ton of very important political people were in the town to celebrate with them. Whenever there was a raid at a house and porn was confiscated, the porn was stored within City Hall. Anytime there was a big political party in town, they would break out the porn and end the night with it. This celebration called for some porn, of course. I mean, he's getting married after all. So this was basically his bachelorette party, right? Well, Darius busted in on them, blowing his police whistle over and over, only stopping to yell, "This place is raided!" All these political men, judges, councilmen, and assessors took off, scuttling to try and hide. The only two that stayed was Chet Morrison and the assistant working the projector. So, while moaning and sex noises filled the room, Chet Morrison stood up and yelled, "What the fuck do you think you're doing? What the fuck? If you and your men aren't out of here now, everyone, including yourself, will be fired." The tides changed as the policemen took off running and the political men come back to their party and their confiscated porn show. This story ran rampant in the French quarters, and when Norma found out about it, she knew that Darius didn't know how to play the game. And still salty about her broken door, went down to the courthouse and made an official complaint, stating for years she had been inspected at all hours of the day and she always cooperated, no matter what, but she was drawing a line at this man busting in her door without even knocking. This resulted in Norma getting the insurance that there would be no more raids without a search warrant. Darius never came back to Norma's again. However, that did not mean Norma was done being raided. Joseph Giaroso, the head of narcotics and soon assistant superintendent of police, and then later superintendent, he would serve Norma with her first search warrant. And he acted on good information. But when he got to the house, Norma was, of course, home alone. She invited him in and allowed him to take a look at all her fabulous collection of nudes as well. She noticed that he was attracted to her. And eventually, he would go on to try and make a move or maybe blackmail her into trying to sleep with him. However, Norma was way too powerful and she was in control of who and why she slept with someone. So, in other words, he did not get his way. In the late 1950s, Norma was on the tippity top of her game. She had many big-time politicians coming to her house regularly. Some of these men would occasionally get out of hand, which was always a very sticky situation for her because she couldn't call the police, and so she would call her good friend Bubba, and Bubba would take care of it. Norma would also pay that favor back by being Bubba's informant, going on to help him catch some casino thieves, a murderer, and an escaped prisoner. Norma also had her trusty big black book. She kept 2 black books, actually. One just as a backup, just in case anything happened to the other one. She would keep information on anyone that was anyone who came through her house, giving them nicknames and listing any identification marks on their bodies, how much they owed, how much they paid, how much they spent, and what girls they liked. She had them all if she needed it to come to that. This came in handy a lot. For example, one of the ways that Norma was able to cleanly cash checks that were given to her was she would give them to Gaspar Collado, and he would cash some of her checks and run them through his business. In other words, I think this is considered money laundering. One of these times, Gaspar let her know American Express told him that that the checks had bounced because the check owner had claimed that they had been stolen. Norma, well, she marched herself right down to American Express with her big black book and let the bank teller know he was outstanding because he was very short and inclined to be a humpback. He had a big prick, and on one side of his leg near said prick, he had a birthmark. She told the bank teller that she would contest if he continued to claim his check stolen. I'm going to tell how he dropped his pants at 1026 Conti Street for 3 or 4 hours and enjoyed it to the fullest. Norma, well, she got her money. Norma knew that you were always at the mercy of the trick and that people were always going to try and take advantage of her because she ran an illegitimate business. And Norma was also not naive to how dangerous it could be for the girls, not just for the fact that the police tried everything to catch her and her girls in the act. Norma tried to take every precaution to not let anything bad happen to any of her girls. She made sure that she had security on the premise. She had security on premises during working hours, but sometimes when they had to work at hotels or motels because the main house was too hot, that was harder to keep her girls fully safe. In the late 50s was when Norma seemed almost invincible when it came to getting any real heat from the cops or any politicians. But this was also when one of the most gruesome acts of her career took place. Norma got a tip one day that the following Saturday they had a raid scheduled for her place. So that day she had Jackie fielding calls and dispatching girls to hotels. Jackie got a call from a man that had all the right answers to her questions, knew the password, and came up with good credentials. So Jackie sent a girl to him. But when she got there, the man brutalized her for several hours. Sadly, he did some gruesome things, like biting off both of her nipples and her clit. God, horrific. When he was finished, he hung her from the coat rack. Luckily, the rack gave away and she survived. Sadly, that monster disappeared into the dark again, never to be found, which is just part of how dangerous this job could get for some of the girls. But it wasn't like they could call the cops and report this. That poor soul, honestly. God, I can't imagine how horrible that would be. Along with that, though, Norma was soon to meet a young girl named Rosemary who showed up at her house with another woman asking for a job. Norma gave it to them. Norma then got a call from a man in jail that turned out to be Rosemary's brother, who told her that she had gotten married to the wrong type and he was forcing her into the sex trade. She couldn't go back home either because their mother was extremely Catholic and felt that she had laid her bed and refused to speak to her daughter because in her eyes she got married way too young and to the first boy who was nice to her. Which kind of is the truth, but that doesn't mean anyone deserves being forced to do anything they don't want to do. Her brother couldn't help her because, well, he was in jail, so he asked Norma to look after her. Norma started to ask Rosemary questions of her situation and who she was and decided to take her under her arm. And this started a almost mother and daughter relationship between Rosemary and Norma. Rosemary caused Norma a lot of headaches and Norma caused Rosemary a lot of trouble as well. Norma tried her best to teach Rosemary the ropes of living within the house. Norma had a system she expected all the girls to follow. One, to keep her clients at ease, but also to make sure the girls knew how to keep themselves safe. Norma had the girls starting off with any date by bathing them completely. Then she would have the girls, before anything sexual could happen, test the men's pre-cum by milking a drop or two and rubbing it in between their fingers. One drop is all you need. If it is smooth, he's all right. If it's even a little gritty, like it has sand in it, something's wrong with him. And if it's real gritty, drop him like a hot potato and get away from him as fast as you can. This is one of the most fascinating things I've ever really read about. I was always curious on what they did to keep themselves protected when STD testing was not that common, or something that, I don't know. But this is very interesting, and I'm sure it doesn't work for everything, but fascinating nonetheless. One night when Rosemary took a date upstairs, she started to bathe him when she noticed several things jumping off him. He told her he was a doctor and there was nothing to worry about. And Rosemary, having none of that though, she smiled and then immediately yelled for Norma. Norma came rushing in. When entering the room, the doctor immediately started becoming defensive, saying he hadn't had them before coming in here, pretty much trying to say that he got them from Rosemary and her house. Norma straight up yelled at him, "Get the hell out of here and don't come back with a case of crabs like that, nor ever try and blame me or my girls for it." Rosemary, though, she was a handful and didn't like to do any part of her job, really. Norma was constantly firing her and rehiring her. They bickered like mother and daughter, and Norma was often at her wit's end with her. Norma had rituals that she and her girls would do. She every night would ask one of her girls for a couple of their pubic hairs, wet it, and put it on over her doorknob lock, and light it on fire right at 7 p.m., right at open. That was when her house opened, 7 p.m. And then the men would just start flowing in. So this was something she did religiously. For a few weeks, Norma had been asking Rosemary for her hair, and normally she would give it to her. On this particular night, though, Norma asked for her hair, and Rosemary told Norma no, get it herself or ask someone else, because she was going bold down there, and stomped away. Norma, flabbergasted that one of her girls had the nerve, ran after her. "Rosemary, I am at my wit's end with you. I spend half my time listening to what you won't do and the other half running up the stairs after your ass. You are the world's worst hooker." So from then on out, Norma had Rosemary assisting Jackie with the door. Jackie also stopped hooking early in her career but continued to work for Norma for years. Rosemary cried with relief. Rosemary would go on to say that Norma was the biggest bitch she had ever known and loved her dearly. The 50s seen even fewer landladies than ever. Dora Rousseau left the French Quarters and moved to a more secluded and very modest house. Chet Morrison was known to visit Dora's new house because he didn't want to run into anyone that could recognize him at Norma's. He couldn't risk anyone seeing him and using it against him, as he and his big political career dreams still had to run on the anti-vice campaign. But, he had needs that needed to be met. Rosemary started being the one to handle delivering the graft for Norma. Norma was known at this point to be paying off a lot of people, including Big Mo and even Chet Morrison. Norma would also have Rosemary deliver an envelope to Pete on occasion. This wasn't to pay him off, but just because they still were doing business together. He ran his brothel still above his lounge, using some of his girls and Norma's. They had customers that they shared and customers they didn't like to share. So one day when Norma nabbed one of his $100 man, took his money and then told him to go to Pete's, where she would send a girl his way, it wasn't a surprise that Pete was a bit pissed off at Norma. So when Rosemary dropped that envelope off that day, he vented hard to Rosemary about Norma, talking about the nerve of this woman. Rosemary knew he didn't mean anything, though, because he still loved Norma, and if he heard anyone talking bad about her, there would be hell to pay for them. Max still loved Norma as well, even though more and more Norma was pushing him away. The girls didn't understand why, because he was so nice and loved her so much, and he was still so good looking. Any of the girls would have loved if he tried to turn their way, but he only had eyes for Norma. Norma, though, she was just becoming overall just angry with everything. Her anger was all the time and burned hot. And often, like anger does, it was often taken out on the wrong people, like her husband and the girls. The only ones that escaped her wrath was the animals that Norma just doted on. She had poodles, parrots, that are still very foul-mouthed, and she also had a meanish monkey. When Norma was mad at Mac, she would fire Rosemary sometimes. She would fire Rosemary then, and then she would also sometimes fire Rosemary and then say, "Come, let's have drinks." After, though, when Rosemary didn't have money to pay, Norma would berate her about the fact that she should be working. Rosemary, starting to learn a little bit of Norma's sass, would go on and give it right back to Norma, though, letting her never forget that she was constantly being fired. Sometimes she would get fired and she would go up and steal $100 from Norma's purse. But the next day, she would always tell Norma the truth and that she took it. Even though Norma would act very mad at her, she would never take the $100 back when Rosemary tried to give it to her. They honestly bickered like mother and daughter. During this time as well, Norma's mother, Amanda, moved into the house. She wasn't doing well and was pretty sick as she was still suffering with alcoholism and now had Parkinson's. And she was even meaner than Norma was, though it seemed most of her anger was taken out on Norma. Norma, no matter how angry Amanda got at her, though, would never retaliate. Even when Amanda would sometimes throw bottles or things at her, she would never get mad at her mom. She always did everything she could to calm and soothe her. All right, well, my freaking camera keeps dying, and I am trying so hard to get this fully recorded. Okay, excuse you. My whole shirt just came unbuttoned. Like every single button at once. Weird. Anyways, we have a weird angle going on because I switched to my phone so we can just finish. I've been doing this all day. Okay, so note to self, you really need a new battery. Anywho, welcome to this new angle. Let's get back to the story. All this adding up, though, and everything was just working on Norma's nerves. And anytime Norma was especially angry, she would take it out on Mac. And if Mac wasn't available, she would pick a fight with Rosemary so she could fire her again. Rosemary was getting fired so much that she decided to rent a room in Norma's house. A lot of the girls, once they had a little bit of money behind them, they would move out of the house. But then Rosemary decided to move back into the house just so she could fire herself and go hang out with Amanda. She didn't even make a fuss about being fired anymore. She would just use it as leverage when Norma tried to be mean or nasty to her. However, Norma may have been catty to Rosemary. It seemed she also really cared for her. One day when Norma fired Rosemary, she had a bunch of dresses delivered and she was going through them. She told Rosemary to pick one out, but Rosemary laughed and said, "Norma, you're always firing me. I can't afford one of these dresses." Norma said, "Pick out the dress. I will buy it for you." So she picked out a dress. And that was the night Rosemary found out that Norma had been calling Rosemary's mother and letting her know that she was safe. She gave Rosemary money and told her she should go see her mom. Rosemary and her mom reconnected, which made Rosemary very happy. But she continued to stay with Norma even after she was fired once again, and again. Oh, and again. Right around the end of the 50s, Norma got a visitor to her door, Jim Garrison. He was a local attorney. Her house wasn't open, but she did invite him in to have a drink. It didn't take her long to get the off vibes from Jim, but staying true to herself, she wasn't rude to any potential customer or someone she may need on her side. He wanted to be her lawyer, but Norma had a lawyer, so she took his card and let him know that she would keep him in mind, even though it seemed as if he was off. The 1960s brought an election, and the results completely shook things up yet again. Chet Morrison had ran instead for governor and lost. A decade of police scandals coming to an end as Joe Giroso, the new cop in town, and Norma was the new cop in town, and Norma did what Norma did. She tried to get him on her good side, and right away it could have worked. Honestly, probably would have worked had something not gotten in the way. But like all good things, they must come to an end. And for Norma, her 40-year reign was entering into its final chapter. But not only a 40-year reign, but also a closing of a way vice was handled within the French Quarter, and bringing an end to accepted sex work within the quarter. And with that cliffhanger is where we will end this part. We have journeyed through history through Norma's eyes, and now we are in the 60s, coming to the tail end of Norma's story, but we still have a lot more to learn about Norma and the political history of New Orleans. So far, what have you enjoyed about Norma's story? Her life to this point seems as if it was a movie, and we aren't done yet. Some of my favorite things about listening and learning to Norma's story is learning some of her clients, the ones that wanted to be free like Madeline, also just showing what it was like through history, how not much really has changed, but how much has changed. And that is it for us tonight, but don't worry, you won't be waiting long for the conclusion to her dramatic story. And trust me when I say this, it's Norma we're talking about, so we have hopefully learned by now Norma is never going to go out with at least being in full control of how her story ends. And the end of her story is just as dramatic as the beginning and the middle. So make sure to join me next Friday for the third and final part to Norma Wallace's journey. And hopefully my camera will have an extra battery so we can not do this. Thank you so much for being here with me tonight. And if you haven't already, please consider following and leaving a review. Also, if you want to continue to see this video version, consider subscribing, as the visuals I hunt down are so fun and fascinating, and it can really bring the story together. If you're watching on YouTube, consider subscribing and liking. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your nights and the rest of your weekends, and I will see you next time. Bye.
I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. Turn back my mattress and let you all my springs. I want you to find me, daddy, till the bell do ring. Oh, daddy, want you to shake.